In today's video, I wanted to take a moment to talk about Techland's DyingLight series. As some of you longtime subscribers are aware, I have sung countless praises towards Monster Hunter and how it provides so much content without constantly charging you for every little smidgen of new content. Both Techland games follow a similar path. Sure, there will be a big DLC expansion in the future that will cost money. However, they always somehow manage to release a decent influx of quests and game modes before the big expansion and after it. Look, I'm sure you've watched countless videos and read many articles on how the end of days is near and all games will eventually be a live service littered with tons of microtransactions. That is why when you see games do the opposite, we need to praise them. We need to acknowledge and show support on the decisions we approve of. That is when I realized I should make a video on how DyingLight came to be. I feel it has some pretty interesting story bits as well. However, after digging more thoroughly, I realized there was drama that happened that I totally forgot about. So then I said, well, let's talk about the good and the bad. So that is what we are going to do in today's video. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. I am Ryofu and this is The Gaming Harbinger. The story of DyingLight actually begins with Dead Island.
Shrunken head, broken legs, body parts on the concrete. Cut them up, butcher style gators in the swamp. Red light, leave them dead, running like a track meet. Scared of nobody.
You know who I am. Give any idea who you're fucking talking to. Or maybe you saw me in the playoffs. I played for the fucking goddamn champions.
Cooking meat, cannibal, trying to eat. I got a zombie army, and you can't harm me.
This game was announced at E3 in 2006, but the game was not released until 2011 on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. It was developed by Techland and published by Deep Silver. It is an open-world action horror game that received mostly positive reviews and sold over 5 million copies. After Dead Island's release, there was some controversy regarding a quote-unquote private joke that was found in the debug code of the PC version. A skill called Gender Wars gave the character Perna the ability to do more damage to male characters, was referred to as Feminist W, and I won't say the second word, but you get the idea. While this is something that wasn't out in the open, much less not visible on consoles, Techland did make an apology in regards to this. As Techland was working on a follow-up to Dead Island in 2012, they quickly came to the conclusion that the team wanted to make some drastic changes to the gameplay. The publisher Deep Silver didn't agree with some of these changes. Techland decided to just make a whole new IP and work on that. Deep Silver would have no choice but to find another developer to create the sequel with. Which, by the way, the sequel game as of 2019 has moved to 4 different developers. After Techland, there was Jaeger Development. In 2015, it went to Sumo Digital, and as of 2019, it is being developed by Dambusters. This kinda explains why Dead Island Riptide feels like a copy and paste. This standalone expansion came out in 2013 and was developed by Techland. It plays and feels the same as the original. It's a solid game and enjoyable, but nothing new was really introduced. This might have been due to Techland focusing more on DyingLight during this period. This time, publisher Deep Silver would find itself in some controversy instead of Techland with the release of the Zombie Bait edition. The edition came with a bust of just the torso, showing that the arms and head had been dismembered. The torso also had open gashes and blood oozing out of it. The torso appears to be of a female in a swimsuit. This caused a negative reaction amongst most gaming outlets, calling the statue disgusting and gross. While Deep Silver did issue an apology, this edition was still released, but in limited quantities. Now that we covered the Dead Island segment, let's jump right into the original DyingLight. In DyingLight, you are playing as an undercover GRE agent, Kyle Crane. Your job is to infiltrate a quarantine zone called Haran. This area, of course, is infested with zombies. Over time, Crane finds his humanity tested. He slowly begins to question the decisions and motivations behind the GRE. One of the major differences going into DyingLight was the incorporation of parkour elements within the gameplay. Originally, they intended on using the grappling hook similar to the one in Mirror's Edge. Over time, they felt this ultimately didn't provide as much freedom as they had hoped. Techland wanted far more than just being able to hang on a wall or wall run. Techland consulted with parkour pioneer David Belle on getting the fluidity and movement just right. If you have never heard of David Belle, you should check him out. He has been in a few movies like District 13, The Family, and Brick Mansions, just to name a few. During this period, it became quite clear that the genetic makeup of the game was going for a more gritty and raw tone. So Techland believed they could not write a story that would appeal to Americans. So they hired DC Comics writer Dan Jolly to assist with the story. This is not the first time he has worked on video games. He assisted with 3 Transformer games that came out between 2010 and 2012, War for Cybertron, Dark of the Moon, and Fall for Cybertron. He also did writing for Prototype 2 and Mafia 3. By 2015, DyingLight released on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC, to even stronger reviews and praise than Dead Island. Initially, it was slated to be released on PlayStation 3 and 360, but Techland felt as if they were running into a lot of limitations, so they focused mainly on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and dropped previous gen support. There was some criticism to the story being predictable, but most felt it was serviceable and did not take away from just how fun the game was. DyingLight would eventually release 1 season pass, 4 paid expansions, 6 free bundles, and 19 paid bundles. According to an article by Eurogamer, nearly 2.5 years after its release, 500,000 users a week were still logging in to play DyingLight. Obviously, some of this free DLC was equivalent to a semi-lengthy story quest, but it can't go unstated that when other companies were using massive amounts of microtransactions, very few games were doing what DyingLight was doing. Nearly 7 years later, we have a Nintendo Switch version of this game with all the released DLC. While sacrifices have been made to the resolution to keep the game stable, it still holds up well. I feel it's on par with the Switch version of The Witcher 3. While 7 years later the sequel to DyingLight is released, that was clearly not the only thing happening. We got an impressive Switch port as well as a free PlayStation 5, Xbox Series Next Gen upgrade for the original game. Think of how many remasters or ports you bought because you love the game so much. This is out of the norm for what happens nowadays. DyingLight 2's story is based around the vaccine being a success and the zombie pandemic ending. However, the GRE decided to continue experimenting with the Haran virus and accidentally creating a variant. This variant somehow escapes the lab, and now we have another zombie outbreak, except this time, antizen and the vaccine don't help. However, ultraviolet light seems to suppress the virus. This also adds a new dynamic to the gameplay, especially in the first couple of hours of the game. Now let's go back to the development cycle of DyingLight 2. Techland started off development in an interesting way this go around. They created this internal technology called City Builder that would allow level designers to deliver minimum input as far as parts of the building, such as ledges, windows. A video I made 2.5 years ago discussed this advanced AI called Promethean AI, which would allow developers to focus less on the minor repetitive stuff in games and more on the important resources. This City Builder sounds a little similar, which I think these are the type of programs that devs need in order to help save on time and money. Once again, Techland felt pretty confident in what changes they had made to gameplay, but they were concerned about the story. This time, Techland went a step further than last time. Not only did they hire Chris Avellone, who is known for his work in Obsidian games such as Fallout, they hired a couple of the writers who were a part of the Witcher 3 team. This time around, Techland wanted to attempt a sandbox narrative. They wanted your choices in how you play the game to impact the story. They wanted the player to care about some of the non-playable characters. So much so they hired Rosario Dawson to provide motion capture and voice of one of the main characters. Techland stated The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones influenced the tone of DyingLight 2. They wanted running into non-infected humans to be just as intense as running into zombies. The game was announced by Chris Avellone via an Xbox press conference in 2018, but unfortunately the game would be pushed back 2 times before releasing in February of 2022. But as always, not without some controversy. Chris Avellone stepped away from the project in 2020. This was due to some sexual misconduct allegations. While Avellone has denied any wrongdoing, he and Techland decided it was best to end his involvement with the project. He has since filed a libel lawsuit. Just like the original, the game is mostly receiving positive responses. The only criticism seems to be toward character dialogue and story. If you wanted 60 frames per second, you would have to play at 1080p. And if you wanted 4K, you would have to deal with 30 frames per second with some occasional dips below 30. And if you wanted ray tracing, you would have to play at 1080p 30 frames per second. Roughly a month after the game release, an update dropped allowing an additional choice called Balanced Mode. This for the most part gives us 4K at 60 frames per second. I'm glad Techland saw this as an issue and cleaned it up. Game Plus mode was added at the end of April 2022. Techland expects to release a minimum of 2 story expansions and a minimum of 5 years of support. Upon the creation of this video, the game has already sold 5 million copies, and in case you didn't know already, the original DyingLight has now sold 20 million copies. And there you have it, some insight into one of the best modern day zombie series. I wasn't sure exactly how to go about doing this, but I knew I wanted to talk about DyingLight 2 because it's a really good game. Initially it was going to be a pretty straightforward video, but the more I digged into the history and the story behind all of this, the more interesting it became. And hopefully you learned a little bit more about DyingLight. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button on your way out. I would greatly appreciate it. Please consider joining this team. I do videos like this all the time. Sometimes we do anime reviews as well as convention stuff. And I want to say thank you so much for helping us hit 200 subs. It means a lot to me. But as always, I appreciate you watching the video to the end, and I will see you next time.